Hugh, the last time we sat down and had a chat, almost 3 years ago, then COVID came along, and we haven't had a face-to-face since then. Phoned each other now and again, so it's really nice to sit down and have this chat.
We still had a lot to chat about.
Absolutely. But can I start it off by asking you your memories of Ramore Street in particular, where you grew up, and in the 40s?
I was born in Ramore Street, in the front room of number 13, in 1938, the same month that Hitler invaded Austria, I think, if any interest. And my memory is of Ramore Street was always, we were at war. The war was always in the background, but there was never any feeling that the war was going to threaten us. The war went on, and life continued in Ramore Street. It was a simple life and a lovely life, and the people were lovely.
And what sort of people were they? What did they do?
Mostly fisher folk. We were all came from fishing stock. My grandfather, my grandmother, from the Doherty family, who were lived opposite. We had your uncle Hugh Ross, lived opposite. He was a coal man, was he?
He was. Soldier first of all, and then came back after the First World War and became a coal man.
That's right. You mentioned soldier. There were quite a number of the people in Ramore Street. I would say about at least a third of the males in Ramore Street were actually in the services,
yes,
including my father.
Yes.
And an awful lot of them, when they came back, got jobs with the council, the urban council. That was where a lot of them went.
So you say number 13. That's the Ramore Head side of Ramore Street, is it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It was the top block, the final block built actually, built in the 1880s. I think the street was more or less built in 3 or 4 blocks, and this was the last one. And my father actually bought 2 houses there. He joined the Navy. He didn't drink, saved his penny a day that he would have got for not having a rum ration, and he bought 2 houses.
Goodness, wonderful.
He was a canny man.
Well, if you come out of your house and sort of turn right in Ramore Street and walk down, then you would be passing the entrance into Garden Court.
Yes.
Not right? Okay.
That's right.
Any particular characters in Ramore Street that you remember or you've been told about?
Well, just on the corner of Garden Court was Bob Elgin.
Yeah.
Bob was an old seaman. And in fact, I think he and my grandfather were very good mates, because I have an old book somewhere with Bob Elgin's name on it. He obviously borrowed it and never gave it back. And Bob had a beautiful yacht in the hallway.
Left-hand side.
Left-hand side, that's right. And I used to stop and stare at the yacht, and Bob used to give me a penny.
Goodness.
The trouble is, it got to the point where I would turn up at the door and I would say, "Penny Bob." It's my mother's horror, of course.
Very good, very good, very good.
But he was, I remember Bob very well. The Fleming family and the O'Neills were connected, and they were in 2 houses further down.
Okay.
And at the very end were the, what did you call them? They were a family of girls. There were about 6 girls, all very good-looking girls.
Okay.
Names, I'll come to me.
Whenever there are people that came into Portrush, and an awful lot of them lived in Ramore Street and Garden Court and Quarry Court and things like that, from Dunseverick, they were fishermen. Were any of those people, I remember ones in Garden Court, I don't know, were any of those fishermen in Ramore Street?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Obviously, the McMullins
Yes.
would be the family one would think of, first of all, coming from that part of the world. I don't think there were any McMullins in Ramore Street. We had Pattons, the Patton family further
Tell me
down.
about the Patton family, because I think of, there's a wonderful man around Portrush years ago called Hugh Patton.
Hugh Patton, yeah.
And it's a terrible thing to say maybe, but I'll say it. It's meant as in a nice way, but he was referred to as the bear. He was a strong big man. Do you remember that?
I do remember. Yeah, I remember him well, actually. I never got to know Hugh, strangely enough, but he was a bit of a legend, and he was very good swimmer on the lifeboat, larger than life, but a nice guy. A nice guy was the impression one got. Hughie Patton.
Hugh Patton. And even there, now Hugh, just Ramore Street and moving on down, and if you can picture it, I can picture it quite well, with Minahan's shop on the left and Miss Reed's little tea room shop on the right. In my day, anyway, she served teas.
Mm-hmm.
You get to the Dockhead Wall.
Mm-hmm.
What's this about the Dockhead Wall? Talk to anybody
Yeah.
from that area, and that's the Dockhead Wall. Tell me about that.
The Dockhead Wall, well, it was where the men would gather. It would be the equivalent of the crossroads in the country,
Right,
where
okay.
the men would gather. And a number of times, I mean, I can hear my mother still saying, run down to the Dockhead Wall and tell your father his tea's ready. Because there would be 6 or 7 men all at the Dockhead Wall, and there would be fishermen, seamen, and what have you. And in fact, to this day, if you look at the Dockhead Wall, you'll see how smooth the top of the stones are, simply from them leaning on the stones.
Right.
To my memory, they were shiny stones,
Okay.
and that's where the men gathered.
Right,
That's where the
okay.
news was.
Well, we're at the Dockhead Wall now, and if you look at the Dockhead Wall, you're looking down to the harbour. We'll go down there in a moment. But if you look to your right now, you're looking towards Ramore Head.
Yes.
There's a big house there at one time.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
Ramore House. It always had a fascination for me. It was mysterious in many ways, I felt. I've read that people called it the castle, but we never called it the castle. It was just the house, or Ramore House, and it was the oldest house in Portrush.
Right, okay.
It was built, I was doing some research recently, and I believe it was built by a man called Richardson. Mm-hmm. He was one of the Richardson from Coleraine. He was a cleric. He was the rector of Clonfecal in County Down, but he spent all his summers in Portrush.
Goodness.
And I think he built that house, but I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it was massive. When they knocked it down, and that's a terrible thing that they knocked it down, in 1966, they discovered that the walls were hollow with peat in between.
Original cavity walls.
The original cavity wall.
Goodness.
As insulation. And it eventually was finished up as flats, of course, but it had a certain air about it, that big house. I was only in it once.
I can remember coming into Garden Court where we lived. And if you walked into Garden Court, the garage to that house came on to Garden Court, and then that Ramore house had a walled garden in it as well. Am I right in that, or is it somewhere else?
Yes, because originally the gardens of those houses ran right back to the recreation grounds.
Right. Okay.
In fact, I used to wonder why they called it Garden Court, because you hadn't gardens. We hadn't any gardens.
No, not at all.
And it was because they were originally the gardens of those houses.
Well, there you are. You live and learn every day.
And when they eventually they were turned over to housing.
Okay. Well, am I also dreaming, or is this correct me if I'm wrong, was there an antique shop or a bookseller just next to the Ramore house? What was his name?
Indeed, Mr. Cochrane.
Okay.
I think I was in it once in my life.
Okay.
The door was always open, dark and mysterious inside, bookshelves. There was even, I think, and I could be wrong on this, I think there was a suit of armour stood just inside the door.
Yeah.
But that's maybe just a memory. But he had an antique shop. It was full of books. And, oh gosh, I wish I could walk into it today.
Yes.
I'm sure there were gems there.
I'm sure there must have been.